Let's take a look at some charts on Stellar from this week's article on Brave New Coin. So Stellar, to me and most people, really is a copy of Ripple in the sense that it's a 100% pre-mined coin with kind of the same audience and goals in mind as far as not necessarily a Swift competitor, but bridging banking and people. They're more public focused than business focused that I can gather as far as their goals. I don't think they intend or care about necessarily directly competing with Ripple, but indirectly they are extremely similar. I mean, they come from the same person, Jed McCaleb. Their networks are extremely similar, act in the same way. The consensus algorithms are different, but in the same category. If we look at their market cap, which is admittedly meaningless because, again, like Ripple, it's 100% pre-mined, so all the coins to ever exist were created on the initial Genesis block. So you get into this issue where you have to decide, do we include circulating and non-circulating coins? Do we include coins held by the Stellar Development Foundation in this calculation? That sort of thing. Those are not included in this specific market cap calculation, but they don't not exist. They definitely have already been minted. So it's wishy-washy and difficult to really discern, because if you look on certain websites, you'll see Ripple's market cap's at 100 billion. You'll see Stellar's market cap's at whatever billion. It's kind of fair to say that. It's kind of not fair to say that. So it's not, you can't really compare all of these directly. That's really the biggest issue. They're all so different. BNB is buy and burn. LTC is proof of work. BTC is proof of work. It's impossible to compare these directly. But if we do it anyway and put them all on a graph, XLM is towards the bottom. There are a few other coins that aren't on here, like Tezos, because for whatever reason, it doesn't load on TradingView occasionally. And Crypto.com or some other coin that, again, is 100% pre-mined that was created out of nowhere a couple months ago. That's on the BNC market cap table. I mean, that something like that coin, the Crypto.com coin or whatever it is a perfect exemplar of why market caps are meaningless, because they can just be created out of nowhere. Similarly to BCH, BSV. I mean, these are forks where most of the coins don't move and haven't moved since the fork. So what do you do? Do you include all those? Are they non-circulating? It's a bad conversation to have because there's too many caveats. So XLM overall, though, over the past quarter, kind of peaked and troughed thus far, and it's just sort of sideways. Since 2016, just as the Stellar people themselves have said, they tried to give this stuff away to as many people as they could, and ultimately ended up deciding on burning half of the supply, because they kind of, I don't know if they thought they couldn't give away more than they had left, or they just had trouble giving it away to people in general, distributing it fairly. Whatever the case, you can see that the efforts paid off in general. In 1819, there were Keybase, Coinbase, a bunch of airdrops all over the place. Historically, there were airdrops in 2016, I think 2017 as well. There's been at least 2 or 3 besides sort of main custodians like Coinbase or just websites, Keybase, that sort of thing. So there are definitely more asset holders, and the circulating supply has increased slowly. So they've done their best in that regard. Overall, you want to be in the market when it's in the S curve of adoption. You don't want to necessarily be holding the coin if there's no growth. I mean, that's just kind of with any investment, I guess. But so you're either holding Stellar long-term, hoping they don't inflate the store of value with the Stellar development coins, or you're just out, waiting for the next wave of adoption. If we compare Ripple and Stellar directly, again, the networks aren't exactly the same, but they're similar enough that it's fair to compare them, I think. And Ripple leads in market cap, daily transaction volume, and fees, and Stellar leads on the GitHub commits side and active addresses side. This doesn't really say much other than if you're deciding between Ripple or Stellar, which network has more activity. To me, the Stellar network is a better purchase just because it has more upside, but that's just my own bias probably. I don't own either coin currently, but this is one thing you can do to look at comparing coins other than just price. If we look at transaction fees between Stellar and Ripple, Stellar's had lower transaction fees historically since 2016, and both of these coins are basically the lowest fees for any coins that have fees. Things like EOS and Tron don't have fees, so they're obviously going to beat a chain with fees, even though the fees are next to nothing. And there's another argument to be said about usage and fees. So if usage on either chains increases dramatically, you'd expect fees to increase a little bit as well. So this kind of hints at, well, maybe these chains aren't exactly super active, which they're not, but most chains aren't on-chain wise. Things like ETH, where you have the double whammy of scaling difficulties plus just massive influx of on-chain activity, then you get sky high, record high transaction fees. So that's the flip side of this coin. If you look at transaction counts and transaction sizes, transaction counts have basically been flat since beginning of the year in the millions, which is an all-time high for Stellar. I just don't know what's behind the mask there as far as what's really going on under the hood. How much of this is bot activity? How much of this is DEX or whatever they're doing, flavor of the month activity, that sort of thing. This looks like staking. So they removed staking in late 2019. This big spike in average transaction sizes was the 55 billion coin burn. What I don't know is why it looks like there's a ceiling here on transactions per day. And there's obviously not, this looks way more organic than it did before is what I'm trying to say. You can usually see mining reward payouts that are weekly or staking payouts that are weekly on exchanges, stuff like that. That'll show up on transactions per day. So overall, this is decently bullish as far as on-chain activity historically. Active addresses have continued to decline since 2018, 2019, early 2019. This again looks like staking payouts, but they've removed staking from the chain. So I'm not really sure what these spikes are. This is a monthly average. So there's clearly just regular spikes for whatever reason. NVT is the inverse metric of on-chain activity. So if versus market cap. So if on-chain activity is increasing and market cap is decreasing, NVT will decrease as well, which basically says that the market cap has not appropriately priced in on-chain activity. Stellar is kind of unique in that its NVT is in the 400s, which is kind of higher than any other coin, I think, if you compare them to each other, which you can't really do for NVT. So although like Ripple, NVT declining year over year is bullish, it's hard to really know unless you deeply investigate what's going on chain. If there's a DEX, if there's coin mixing, all this stuff is going to influence NVT, just like that coin burn did. I mean, this is a 30-month average, and it brought the NVT to an all-time low. So looking at this without knowing that there was a 55 billion coin burn and move on chain, you'd say, oh, this is super bullish. But you have to investigate that further. Looking at GitHub activity, there's clearly activity here. As a trader, that's all I care about. It's binary for me. Are people working on this, or are people not working on this? And people are definitely continued to work on this. There are regular updates, just like Ripple. They just released a new update this week, 14.1, I think. So there's definitely development activity continued. If you look at Google Trends, like most coins that haven't returned to their all-time high, Google Trends has been flat over the past 2 years since late 2017, early 2018. And since August 2018, it's just been flat. There's really been no thrill here from people looking at, what is Stellar? How do I buy Stellar? Where do I stake Stellar? Why can't I stake Stellar anymore? That's those sort of questions. Nobody's really Googling that relative to 2017, 2018. All right, if we look at technicals, we have yearly pivots, VPVR, volume profile of the visible range, RSI, and the 50 and the 200 EMA. So the first thing I noticed on this was the VPVR, the volume profile, because price is right at the support here. So one way to read this would be there's tons of interest at this level. Buy interest, sell interest, whatever it is. There's lots of activity here. So if there's lots of activity at a horizontal level and prices returning to that level, the thought is there should be renewed activity interest at that level again. So this should be a support level. If this fails, price is likely to go much lower because there is a lot of activity here, meaning it should be a strong support. Unfortunately for Stellar, it looks like it is headed lower because it's got a bearish 5200 cross coming up. It's below the yearly pivot. There is not a bullish divergence yet. You could argue a weak bullish divergence. So when the RSI doesn't make a higher low, but is equal to the previous low in price, that is considered a bullish divergence as well. You know, there isn't renewed momentum here. There isn't continued momentum down, which is all you're looking at here. Despite making a lower low, momentum did not increase. Now, it's not a frank bullish divergence like it was here. You had a lower low in price and a higher low in RSI. Yeah, it's hindsight, sure, but you're supposed to catch these as they're happening. So this is almost as it's happening, and I'd say there's a decent case that this does go lower, but momentum is pretty weak for the bearish side. I would be more confident in a buy here if there was a bullish divergence here. The cloud also says it's in neutral territory, flipping to bearish. Bearish TK cross is coming. Bearish cloud will eventually flip if price does break 07 below the cloud. So this would be a short entry if it breaks below the cloud. Another thing I didn't mention was there's clearly a type of head and shoulders here with a horizontal at the yearly pivot at 082 or whatever it is. And price is broken below that support as well. So resistance should be support, wasn't support. This should be support. We'll see if it's support. So there's lots of horizontal levels that should be holding for Stellar but haven't been, which is certainly troublesome if you're on the long side of that. Flipping to Stellar BTC, there was a decent chance on the weekly that this edge-to-edge trade from basically 1,000 to 2,500 sats looked pretty decent. It's still possible. We're talking mid-2021 here. This isn't anytime soon. That's definitely a chart that I have on alert and I'm just watching, just forgetting about it. There's no reason to continue to track it every day or anything like that. If you're expecting a trade in 2021 and it's September 2020. But this does look like the bearish side is fading over the past year. But recently, clearly it's down 42% in like a month. So it hasn't really had any bullish momentum. One thing this does show, unlike the USD pair, is that there is clear evidence for a bullish divergence and that there's this TK disequilibrium here, C-clamp forming, which says price is oversold. It's decently far away from the 200 as well. So I like a retest of 800 sats, mean reversion essentially. There is not a bullish divergence here yet on RSI, but I would watch for a mean reversion over lower lows. So the range is basically lower lows at all these horizontals, 500, 550 sats versus mean reversion to 800, which is probably more likely at this point. So overall, Stellar's more in a limbo technically than it is fundamentally. It's certainly doing things and people are using it on the fundamental side. It's just an unexciting coin for many people, which is why I don't think it's seen a lot of exuberant bullish activity over the past year.